set to go? Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We do have quorum. Not everyone is in attendance, but we do have quorum. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee of December 11th, 2024. My name is Kathy Daigle-Gammon. I'm Chair of Audit and Finance and District 1, Waverly Fall River, Musquodoboit Valley. Our clerk with us today is Dorothy. Our legal counsel is Karen. And our CFO is Jerry. And we're being very informal. No last names. I'll call the meeting to order. The Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaty signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. I would ask for approval of the minutes of October 9th and November 26th, please. Councillor Cleary, Councillor Morse, second. Any errors or omissions? If not, we'll call for the question. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand or saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Are there any changes?
No additions or deletions have been received by the clerk's office.
So is there a mover and a seconder for the order of business? Councillor Cleary? Councillor Hensby, thank you very much. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Business arising out of the minutes, there's none. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. Hearing none. Motions of reconsideration, there are none. Motions of rescission, there are none. Consideration of deferred business is none. Notice of table matters is none. So we move to correspondence. Madam Clerk, is there any correspondence?
No correspondence or petitions have been received by the clerk's office.
Thank you very much. And we have no presentations. We can now go to public participation. As of 4:30 on Tuesday, December 10th, there were no registered speakers for this meeting. We had no one sign up at this moment as well, either. Okay. So we will ask if there is anyone in the gallery that would like to speak. For the second time, is there anyone in the gallery that would like to speak? The third and final time, if there are no other persons from the gallery that wish to speak. So we will move on then to information items brought forward, and there are none. And then to reports, 13.1, Auditor General. 13.1.1 is the Diversity and the Inclusion Audit. And we welcome Andrew Atherton and his team.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here on such a beautiful beautiful day. Great to be here for first time with many of you for our new Audit and Finance Committee. I have two reports to go over with you today. First, we're going to cover our audit of diversity and inclusion, and then I will speak to our review of supplementary education funding provided to HRCE. Before I get started, I'd like to introduce two of my team who have joined me today. I have Leanne Burnett immediately to my right. She was responsible for leading our work on diversity and inclusion. And a little further down, Ashley Maxwell led the work we did at HRCE on supplemental education funding. While they led the work, particularly diversity and inclusion, I have to thank everybody in my office. It was an all-hands-on-deck project, and they all worked extremely hard to get this done. At the same time, I also would like to thank the folks, the staff and management across HRM and at HRCE for their support. With that, I will try to pull up my slides. Okay, as I just referenced, our office undertook a wide-ranging audit looking to assess whether HRM have taken adequate steps to advance diversity and inclusion, whether they monitor and report on progress, and whether business units are receiving enough support through the process. Our team reviewed a ton of documents, talked to dozens of people during the course of our audit, and we saw many examples of business units across HRM working to improve diversity and inclusion. One important step that helped us frame our audit was the creation in 2018 of a diversity and inclusion framework. The framework gives the municipality a blueprint for where they want to go and help my office to define the criteria upon which to gauge HRM's performance. Beyond that, we found many examples of things happening, from big picture strategies to new programs put in place, all the way down to specific actions taken to help improve diversity and inclusion at the ground level. Our audit considered both central actions and those taken by business units. I'll start with what we saw centrally at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We tested 49 actions identified from 4 key areas the office is responsible for. Those cover the accessibility strategy, French language services strategy, an immigration strategy, and the recommendations that came from the task force looking at commemoration of Edward Cornwallis and the recognition and commemoration of the Indigenous History Report. We found 42 of those 49 actions were complete or in progress. This includes many steps forward, such as improvements of the accessibility of our main website, halifax.ca, partnerships with many immigrant-serving organizations, and the 2023 hosting of the North American Indigenous Games. Those are just a few examples of the work being done across the municipality. And you can see the full list of the 49 actions we looked at in Appendix 2 of our report. Despite all the work that has been done, we did find the office has been slower to implement some other strategies. For instance, management told us the anti-Black racism strategy was expected to be rolled out in the fall of 2024. That would have been 3 years later than originally intended. And as far as I can see as of today, I don't think anything has been released yet. For a current status on that, you'll have to speak to management and see where things stand. There are a couple other strategies that we also told were still in development with no timelines for their completion. Those cover gender equity and Indigenous services. Another key role of the office, and one that we found that was fairly positively received, is their regular day-to-day support of HRM business units. I'll use that as a segue into what we found when we tested those business units. You can see here some examples of things we found that have been completed. Okay, hold on. I always flip at the wrong point on that one spot, so I'm going to back up and I'm going to go to my business unit summary notes. To get a sense of what has been accomplished across the municipality, we selected actions and initiatives from 6 business units. You can see here a chart showing the testing results from each of the 6. Overall, we found that 20 actions were complete, another 7 in progress, with only 4 of the actions not yet started. You can see some examples on this slide of what we found that has been completed. Some of these you may already be familiar with, the transit code, for instance. Others are a little less apparent to the public, but just as important to those impacted by them. For instance, connections made by Parks and Rec with underrepresented groups. Again, if you'd like to see all of these details, they're available in our report in Appendix 3. I'm going to move on now from the testing part of our audit. We also took a look at the training offered to support diversity and inclusion. We noted there is a mandatory corporate training course offered, but that only 31 of 50 employees we tested had taken it or a specific business unit training. We did note the training was only offered 29 times over the last 24 months, so access may have been an issue, and that was a concern we heard during our audit. As I mentioned, some business units offer their own training course, and we identified some concerns with those as well. Specifically, we found that while Halifax Regional Police have their own program for new cadets, they don't require any civilian staff or an experienced officer who's new to their force to participate in diversity training, whether their own or through HRM. You'll note we have 2 recommendations in this area. First, to assess whether there is a sufficient number of training sessions available to accommodate all staff. And second, to develop a process to ensure all new hires across the municipality take the expected diversity and inclusion training. I'll now move into what I'll say is the primary area of concern for me from this audit. I've already talked about all the work being done to promote and improve diversity and inclusion across HRM and throughout its business units. But what's missing is oversight and monitoring from a central body. HRM created its diversity and inclusion framework to guide the approach across the municipality, but now they need to monitor its implementation. We found no one was assigned that responsibility to oversee this across HRM, and that no assessment has been completed of whether the right or most effective work is being done. As I've said, lots of work is being done, but simply doing work isn't sufficient. HRM must start to determine whether the work done is the best use of its limited resources. We made 2 recommendations in this area. First, to assign that central oversight and monitoring role, and second, to implement a regular process to assess work against framework goals to allow for proper prioritization. Business units obviously have a role to play in implementing the framework, but the Office of Diversity and Inclusion has not provided them with any guidance on how they should be doing that. We found that a template had been created within the Office of D&I, but it was never shared with the business units. As a result of this, we found that 4 of the 6 business units we tested did not have a plan to implement the framework, leaving it unclear what their plans were to move forward in an intentional manner in this area. We did find that Halifax Fire and the Planning and Development Unit both had plans in place. Of note, both of these units have an embedded D&I advisor, a role which doesn't exist consistently across all business units. We recommended that HRM define the expectations for business units regarding implementation of the framework, and then support them with guidance on how to do so. Moving on to some monitoring, there is regular reporting from business units, but as I mentioned earlier, no central monitoring. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion requests quarterly and annual reports from business units, and we found that the annual reports were provided for all business units, but that only Halifax Fire has provided all expected quarterly reports. The remaining 5 business units we looked at had provided only 14 of the expected 40 reports over our 2-year audit period. Now, whether the reports are prepared or not, we found that no one is reviewing them centrally. This is consistent with the lack of central responsibility for oversight and should be addressed to ensure the reporting is both necessary and helpful. When we reviewed the quarterly reports, we found a number of issues and concerns. It was hard, if not impossible, to connect what was happening with why it was happening. The results were listed that didn't link back to actions taken. There's a lack of performance measures in place to assess whether actions taken have accomplished what was intended. And no timelines exist to show when work was expected or is expected to occur. The current expectations require a lot of reporting that is not being used, and based on our assessment, is not terribly effective. We're recommending here that HRM determine what is necessary and develop a process to help business units complete that effectively. Moving beyond the business unit reporting and looking at overall reporting to council, we found a similar situation. There's a lot of reporting happening, but it needs a good once-over to determine what is necessary and what is helpful. We identified an annual report on overall framework implementation, including an update on each business unit's achievements, along with individual reports on each of the 4 strategies that I referenced earlier. This is leading to large volumes of information provided to all of you. The last annual report, for instance, was 115 pages long, but we don't see a clear update on the status of completed work or planned work. Along the same lines of our recommendation regarding reporting by business units, we're suggesting HRM consider opportunities to streamline the reporting to council to provide better information rather than more information. My final issue connects back to the reporting concerns, as there is no process to collect data necessary to assess programs. I've already mentioned that reporting contains no performance measures, and this lack of data is a big part of that. While I appreciate all the work being done across HRM around diversity and inclusion, the next step is to become more intentional with that work. Start to set targets that actions and initiatives are supposed to achieve, and collect the data to measure the results, and then report on that progress. Our final recommendation is to determine what data is necessary and develop a plan to collect it. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear as I wrap this up. We found a ton of work happening, a lot of programs, initiatives, specific actions being taken, all with the intention of improving diversity and inclusion in HRM. The concerns noted in my report and the 8 recommendations made are intended to help HRM move forward to the next step and become a little more purposeful in the work that's being done across the municipality. I'm happy to say that management have accepted all 8 of these recommendations, and we're very positive when receiving this report. I look forward to following it up to see the progress that has been made. Okay, with that, I'm going to take a break and allow all of you to ask me some questions on this one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. A couple questions in regards to some of the reports and stuff. Do you think quarterly might be too frequently for some of these reports in regards to how much change you anticipate for every quarter of the fiscal year? Also, the hiring opportunities that we have throughout the municipality. I don't know if there's a surge at certain times of the year or not, or is it consistent across the board? I'm just kind of wondering, should there be a probationary period where the new hires need to go through a D&I training opportunity before their 90 days are up, or perhaps immediately after 90 days, the probationary period? Just kind of curious about that. And you talked about D&I having a template, but you had fire and police had plans as well, but was their plans any different from that template that D&I had?
Okay, 3 questions. First of all, is the quarterly reporting too frequent? Our recommendation is worded fairly carefully there, in that I think that's up to you and management to determine if that's too frequent. I think it's fair to say that your point of how much changes in a 3-month period, I think that's a very reasonable question. And I think it's worth having a look at it to determine how frequently is necessary, how often are meaningful changes actually happening, so that we're not asking business units to prepare reports that aren't going to be looked at and don't really address any changes. Second question, around requiring the training during a probationary period. Again, I think that one's going to really have to fall to management, depending on the timing of when people are hired. Okay, it is supposed to be done within 6 months. I don't believe it is a definitive requirement of moving from probationary to full-time based on the number of people we saw that haven't taken it. I believe that management is looking there to find a different way. Their response to our recommendation referenced some online training, which will hopefully facilitate taking it. I know I can speak personally. I've had a hard time finding one that I could attend. I'm finally booked a year later in January to take the diversity in training. I mean, I've taken it with the province, but to get it through the municipality, there weren't a lot of offerings. So requiring it in a probationary period as a condition of continued employment, I think we have to figure out how many sessions we have to offer before we can get to there. Now, your final question, and of course I didn't take notes on what this question was, around the template used at the implementation plan that was used at fire and planning and development, was that consistent with the template at, okay. So their templates were specific to what they wanted to do. They hadn't seen the template that management had developed. So they weren't necessarily consistent, but they were a plan for the individual business units to move forward with.
And do you think there should be some compatibility between that? You know, if the D&I is coming up with a template, should that not be applicable across the board, or or have them massaged a bit to fit their business unit.
And that's why we're suggesting that so the Office of Diversity and Inclusion needs to figure out what do we want, what do we expect in terms of implementation plans for the business units, and then to provide guidance to the business units. So once they do that, the plans in place at Fire and Planning and Development may require a bit of a massage, to use your words. But first step is for centrally to decide what are we expecting from our business units, provide them some support and guidance in doing that, and then go from there.
Go ahead.
And my last question in regards to diversity and inclusion and stuff and our advocacy, when we're going out to job fairs and business fairs, whatever the case may be, what kind of presence have you noticed in the community in regards to us being proactive out there in job fairs and various community areas?
We wouldn't have been out actually attending those job fairs. We certainly saw plenty of action items that referenced attending job fairs and hiring fairs. So we've seen reference to it happening. I can't speak to how prevalent they are and how often they're out there.
Thank you, Councillor Hensby. Good. Councillor Cottle.
Thank you. I'm not on this committee. I'm happy. You're okay? All right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's always, valuable to take a step back and take a look at how things are going. I know over the last 4 years, Council's been very supportive of the Diversity and Inclusion Office, that we've provided a number of resources and new hires, and it has been a noted priority. So, having a check-in to see what progress we're making is it time well spent. I'm just wondering, in terms of trying to address some of these issues, do you see this as a resourcing, a staffing resource issue? Like, is it a framework management kind of program issue? Like, if we're to look at how are we to address some of these things, is the D&I office have enough resources to attend to some of these matters, or just trying to figure out what the root of the issue is here in terms of the progress?
We wouldn't have looked at how well the office was resourced, but at the same time, I don't think the type of topics that we're looking for, that they're heavily resource dependent. This is about just taking some responsibility at a central level and doing that monitoring. You're going to have to talk to management to get a sense of whether they feel they have the resources required to do this. There are audits where I feel that it's fairly apparent we have a big ask and maybe too much. I don't have that sense here, but I don't fully know exactly how the office will manage this. As you say, they have been growing. They're doing a lot of good work. The next step is just to look at what's happening and start to have a little more intentional approach to it, to make sure that the municipality is accomplishing what all of you are looking for it to accomplish.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Very important to have this update at this point. I guess I'm wondering if you have any, also looking at next steps and what council should be doing next. Who do you think is best to provide the oversight of the office to make sure that we're monitoring things appropriately? So who do you think should be doing that? Should the office be providing oversight to itself, or should there be another staff person or a person at HRM? And also, we're asking a lot of our diversity office, and so if we're going to put performance measures in, as you're suggesting, what do you think are the most high priority areas to look at immediately in terms of performance measures? Thank you.
In terms of the oversight, the office falls under the CAO's office, so that's where the oversight of that office would fall. What I'm looking for, what we're talking about, is more oversight broadly of what's happening across HRM and providing that central look to make sure that the work that's being done in each business unit is working towards the goals that the municipality as a whole is looking to accomplish. Whether that falls to the office or not, presumably it falls within the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, but that's ultimately a decision for CAO following your direction to make on how that wants to work. In terms of which performance measures we need to look at first, again, I think that comes back to council priorities. What is it that you folks want to see happening? What are the outcomes that you want to see happening across the municipality? Prioritize from there, and then work on the performance measures to support those priorities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I could sort of break down all the recommendations that you've said today, Mr. Atherton, we're kind of looking at developed processes and then compliance with those processes, and some sort of central control and accountability would be kind of the two major themes that I see coming out. I'm happy to see management's response has been to accept all of your recommendations, which are fairly limited. I mean, 8 recommendations. I'm used to seeing reports with sometimes 20, 30, 40 recommendations. So I'm glad to see you're thinking broadly and bringing these in sort of fewer buckets, if you will. So thank you for that. Also, I don't know who's doing the design for the reports, but I do like the graphics in the front matter. It's easy to understand. Normally, the chair, before she was chair, would put forward a motion for a management plan to come forward on this. So I'd be happy to do that. And I've sent our clerk, Dorothy, an email with that. But the what I'd be looking at would be a motion that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee request the Chief Administrative Officer to develop an action plan to address the recommendations from the Diversity and Inclusion Audit and report back to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee within 6 months. Thank you, Councillor Morse. And it's important for us, especially for new folks to the committee, you know, when you look at performance audits and the way our Auditor General works, and I appreciate the questions that he gets and his responses to those questions. Very diplomatic in those cases. But it's really management that needs to focus on whether it's resources, whether it's, you know, who's going to be responsible for it, and so on. And so having management take accountability and bring back that plan in a short period of time so that we can do that is important. And also the timing works out quite well. We have a soon to be developed new strategic plan for the municipality from 2026 to 2030. And in the earlier material we've received from our corporate planning staff, moving diversity, inclusion, and accessibility up as a central theme moving across all parts of the municipality. I'm not sure if they received your report and you're like, oh, I think we should move on this, but it seems kind of, you know, coincidental, but happily coincidental, that what your recommendations are, we're already getting that feedback from our senior staff here at the municipality. So, Mr. Atherton, I just want to thank you for that, and I appreciate your efforts in this.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Thanks for the action plan. There are no other speakers. Would you like to call for the question on the motion for the action plan? Yes. Show of hands, Dorothy? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed? Nay? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Andrew on this just before we leave this one, just in case? Good. So thank you very much. And now we'll move on to 13.1.2, the review of the HRCE supplemental education funding agreements.
Okay, before I speak to supplemental funding agreement, I do just want to give credit where it's due. Those front pages are the creation of our my admin support person / communications person, and the audit managers who are responsible for the audit. I get to see them once they're mostly done and add really meaningless comments from there. They do all the work to make them, so I do appreciate your pointing those out. Okay, I'll now run quickly through our review of supplemental education funding at HRCE. Little background, in early 2024, Council requested my office examine HRCE and CSAP supplemental education programs. This funding is required by a clause in the Charter, and there is a signed agreement providing some overall governance for it. Once we received that request, we took a look and determined that our work would look only at HRCE, as that represents over 90% of the funding that's provided. We also decided that given the situation, a review level of assurance was sufficient for the work. Our work was focused on compliance with the agreement between HRM and HRCE. Realistically, we can't do a broader audit at HRCE as they're not part of the municipality. So the furthest I can go is to follow the dollars that are provided by HRM to them. Overall, you can see we found HRCE is compliant with the requirements of the agreement. But to qualify that, the agreement is, I'll say, very thin on details. You will see throughout our report that we flag items as uncertain or that we can't conclude on due to that lack of clarity. I will also note that the agreement is clear on giving HRM access to any information that our office obtained to complete our review. There's a standard annual report, but if management or council wish to learn anything more, the agreement provides all the authority required to obtain those details from HRCE. We also found that HRM presently conducts effectively no monitoring of what HRCE is doing with this funding. We tested 3 main requirements from the agreement. At a high level, we looked to see whether the required details were included in the annual report, and they were. Whether the amounts spent were reasonably within proposed budget. In this case, we can't say, as reasonability is not defined in the agreement. And finally, whether detailed expenses were reasonably in line with the agreement. In this case, we found most of them were compliant. As you can see, HRCE was basically in compliance with the agreement to the extent there was enough detail to be compliant with. Now, I'll just go through each of those in a little bit more detail. You can see here in terms of the annual report and our testing results, we looked at 7 specific areas that were expected in their annual reporting, and we found every one of them was included. Basically, HRCE is providing the annual report that the agreement expects them to provide. Getting into budget versus actual, the agreement includes a suggested budget, but it is unclear the extent to which HRCE must follow it, or more accurately, it isn't clear how much they can deviate from that budget. The agreement states that HRCE shall deliver programming as closely as possible, acting reasonably. That provided no objective measure for us to try to determine what was reasonable in this case. That said, we did find the budget for 22-23, which was the year we looked at, was quite different from the template in the agreement. That said, HRCE disclosed their intentions and their planned budget in their 21-22 annual report. It was just impossible for us to determine whether those changes are reasonable and whether the advance notice is sufficient to use a different approach. The agreement just didn't give us enough to work with there. Moving on to detailed spending, we had the same outcome when we dug into some of the specific spending items. Well, where there was enough detail in the agreement, HRCE was compliant with it, but there often wasn't clarity. I'll give one example here. There were travel expenses for music and arts employees included under a category of supplies and materials. There was no category in the agreement that obviously covered those expenses, and it simply wasn't possible to determine whether these were intended to be covered or not. We did look at those where there were travel expenses. The employees in question reasonably would have had travel. It made sense that they would be traveling to do their jobs. but it wasn't clear whether those expenses were intended to be covered by this funding or not. There was no category for them. Supplies and materials, by basic definition, doesn't seem as though it would cover travel, but there was nowhere to put it and no way for us to determine whether those were intended to be covered by the agreement or not. Okay, moving on into what HRM is doing. The current reporting requirements do not include some what I would call key details which would be helpful for fulsome monitoring. The agreement is clear that there is an option for HRM to ask if they want that information, as I've already stated. But we found HRM is not looking at the information already provided, so there's not really any point in discussing asking for any additional information at this stage. If HRM is concerned about what is happening with the money being provided, a first step would be to review the details in the annual report and assess what additional information would be helpful. So where do we go from here? You'll notice that unlike most of our reports, there are actually no recommendations in this one. And that is because I believe all of you, along with management, have to determine what monitoring and associated reporting is reasonable for this agreement and this funding. The actions to date, or the lack of action, lack of monitoring, suggests that there isn't a large concern or urgency about how this money is being spent. On the flip side, asking my office to investigate this spending suggests that perhaps there is a concern. And I'm going to leave it with all of you to start the conversations and decide what you want to do going forward, how much you want to look at this, how much this funding warrants additional attention. With that, I'll turn it back over to you and we'll take some more questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the audit, and especially to the lack of recommendations. This is probably, I think, one of the trickiest things councils going back to amalgamation have dealt with. In fact, there were councils that actually begun to cut the funding because the charter says we have to provide this money, but it says as of 1996, and in fact you could cut it by 10% a year after that date in 1996 and eliminate it altogether, but you have to give them that leeway of 10% a year, so assuming over a 10-year period you could cut them. And so there was a council previous to me joining council where they made that decision to start cutting. I am of a different opinion, and thankfully my colleagues are as well, that supplementary funding is incredibly important. And frankly, because the province is derelict in their duties in funding schools. And so the original intent was arts and music. And if you look at the reports that we get back from them, a goodly chunk of that money goes to librarians, education assistants, support staff, and partly because, actually almost entirely because, the province was pulling funding for librarians and others. So those are core things that I think many of us think the school board should be providing, or the HRCE should be providing. But the province wasn't funding them for it. And so there has been some questions and some dialogue around this council table and previous council tables around what is the appropriate mix. And it often comes down to, do we hold the kids hostage in a battle with the province over how much they give the schools? And it's kind of like, well, we could withhold the funding and say you have to spend 100% of it on arts and music. But then the kids don't get librarians because the province won't care. The minister's not going to give them more money for librarians. And so then we deprive them of librarians. And so I've been here for 2 negotiations of that agreement. And my recollection is they're kept fairly vague and flexible, knowing that we don't really have a choice because the province isn't going to fill in the gap if we leave the gap. And so it kind of puts you over a barrel. I wasn't one of the ones who recommended you do this audit, but anyway, that's a whole other story. And I'll just mention travel a little bit too. And I don't know how familiar people are with, say, music teachers as an example. There's not a single music teacher in HRCE that spends an entire day in one school. In fact, they often cover 2 and 3 schools in a day. And so to do their job, they have to travel between schools. And so same with art teachers. It is a mess. And I wish we didn't have to provide supplementary funding. It's a vestige of the old city of Dartmouth, the old city of Halifax. I'm not sure if Bedford did it as well, but certainly Halifax and Dartmouth. And we expanded it to the county. In the time that I've been on council, we've made it universal. It's across all areas of HRCE equally, which was not the case when I got on council. And so I don't expect you to comment on any of that because, you know, that's even though you used to work for the province, we're the one of the AGs for the province. I think it's outside the scope of saying, you know, what should the province do, what should we do? I guess my question, and it's kind of answered even though you didn't provide recommendations, is we should bite the bullet and admit that we either make the HRCE spend it in a particular area or several areas, and basically then track it and say, tell us percent-wise what you're spending here, here, and here, and that then meets the agreement. But then we would all have to agree on those areas that they're going to spend it on. And I'm not, oh, well, you know what? I'll look forward to that discussion, see if we have it. Because I think the negotiation for a new agreement will be coming up within this term. So I don't know, I guess, you know, from good governance, if we're providing funding to a group, especially in the order of $13, $14 million, more accountability is better than less accountability, is what you're telling us.
I would always be in favor of more accountability than less accountability, absolutely. In this case, it's $13 or $14 million, and you all are much more aware of where that funding is needed and what issues it's addressing and what issues you intend for it to address. And I think you have to, as you said, Councillor Cleary, you have to determine what you want from HRCE as their part of you providing the funding. And that's up to you guys to decide how you want to go about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morse.
Thank you very much for the report and at least giving us a starting point. Sounds like this is something that really Audit and Finance needs to conduct a next step. Perhaps we should have the annual report come to Audit and Finance as a suggestion of what we could do. That puts us in the position, I guess, of becoming educational experts and deciding how to administer educational programs. I don't know if I have a question for our Auditor General except to say thank you for the report. I do think this is an incredibly valuable thing that we do here in HRM, that this funding for the arts and for music has become part of the culture of our city, and the education that's provided here goes way beyond music education. As one example, our family has some experience because our daughter was in the violin program for a few years, and if you've ever heard the end of year violin concert at the Forum, where 1,000 young violin players are playing more or less at the same time in a final concert, it's an absolutely beautiful thing, and the students learn a lot about working together as well as a lot about music. So anyway, I think this is just incredibly valuable. I find it disappointing to hear that there's so little monitoring of it, and I think that Councillor Cleary's got hit it on the head about the travel. The music teachers have to go to so many schools all over HRM every day. They don't really get to know their students, so I would have some concerns about the quality of the education if the teachers are required to move to so many different schools every day. It's also stressful, I would imagine, for the teachers. And maybe there is a better way to distribute the work. You'd think it would be somewhat more predictable. Given that the funding is happening every year, why can't they provide a more predictable approach? I also, this is mostly for my colleagues and how we would go forward on this. It's not the most equitable program from my experience because there is funding for some schools to have choir conductors and that sort of thing, but other schools don't have that offered. So I think those equity concerns would be another thing. It's, how can we offer a more predictable program, perhaps one that doesn't require as much travel? Those would be things that I would be interested in pursuing. And I guess to our auditor, if he has any suggestions for how the Audit and Finance Committee should take a next step here, that would be welcome. Thank you.
I don't have anything specific that I feel that, or how Audit and Finance should take this on going forward. I just, the point I've made is, you have to figure out what your priorities are, and then work to create an agreement with HRCE that covers those, and work with management to determine the level of oversight and monitoring that you're looking for in this area.
But do we have that ability? Does Audit and Finance have the ability through the CAO to direct how HRCE delivers arts programs?
That would be part of the negotiated agreement. So no, you wouldn't have the ability to tell them what they must do, but you are providing the funding. So you do have some leverage, I would say, in negotiating with them to get what you would like to get.
Okay, great, thank you.
Do you want to speak, Chair? No? Okay. Councillor Cottle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think there, there's a lot of agreement about, the importance of this investment and the support in arts and culture in our city. That's really what we're talking about, and it's being delivered through HRCE to the youth, and that's a wonderful thing. It's an important thing, and something that I know I highly value as well. My question was about, what the opportunity is to review the agreement, like when those opportunities arise, like how often is this agreement, on the table for discussion and review and renegotiation. The thing that does concern me is that, it is a significant amount of funding that is going to the school from the municipality, which has a lot fewer resources than the province. And it's not our core responsibility to deliver educational program in schools. So, the fact that we're doing this, I think it's important to understand how it's aligning with our own priorities and our own values and principles at the municipality to advance some of our bigger initiatives. I know some of that funding, and I believe this to be true, though, because I can't really follow the money specifically, that, another way this money is being spent is hiring, in Spryfield, we have a Mi'kmaq elder in our high school to provide support for Indigenous students there, and I believe that position is funded, through this program, and that's an amazing thing to have. If you go to the J.L. Ilsley High School to see, the art, the information about culture, having that resource there. Tish does an amazing job, not just for Indigenous students, but for all students in that school. So, that's really important. And so for us, that aligns well with our diversity and inclusion priorities. But if we're not kind of accounting for this and tracking this and recognizing it, then in achieving our own priorities, then we're kind of, I think, missing an opportunity to really highlight the importance of some of the work that's taking place. As for the travel, I believe, and I don't, because I've only become aware of this program really when I got on council, that it used to be limited to Halifax and Dartmouth, and then at some point the program was supposed to be expanded to all of HRM. And I think having some accounting around that and some, measurable deliverables to say, okay, like how much of this programming, of this funding is being spent throughout the municipality is also something that would be important for us to understand, to ensure that we're continuing to, provide opportunities across our municipality. The music program did start to come out to Sambro just recently, just in the last few years. I can't remember exactly when, but and that was so appreciated by the parents in those communities whose kids went to that school. So, that was a wonderful thing to see happen, and very much appreciated. But again, in terms of our own priorities in delivering services to rural communities, that is something that perhaps through this program, if we had an accounting and an understanding, we could recognize that as an alignment and deliverable. So I see there is value in having a better reporting structure and accounting. It's not a little bit of money. I believe we're the only municipality in Nova Scotia that provides this supplemental funding, and from what I hear, schools down in the valley and up in Cape Breton, they also have musicals and school music programs. They also have cultural resources. So, I think that there's a fair and honest discussion to be had with the provincial government around, if we take a look at this, like how can they also help better support schools in HRM, and why are we not getting the same treatment as other schools across the province if that's the case? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carl. I would say that in the annual report, it does say by district and by school, all of the investments and where they're at, and we do get that every year. But I think we're going to try to refine to the work of the conversation into just the review of the funding agreement. I do believe this is excellent conversation and debate for when we're at budget and we're looking at the agreement and the terms of the agreement, and I'm sure legal will help with some of that when that comes out. The agreement is done annually. It's a 1-year agreement, year to year. Thank you for allowing me that little bit. And Councillor Hensby, you're next.
Just to follow up on the comment that Councillor Cleary there said, I think it's a 5-year agreement we had in the past, of 2019 to 2024. And I think the most current year we're in now is probably a time for a renewal or a review. So I think it's important that perhaps we have the supplementary education report given to us during the budget process for the full council, not just this audit and finance committee. And I've been looking at some of the past reports here, and I can tell you it took some data mining to try and find the reports and stuff, even trying to find it on the website for the Halifax Regional Education Center. Just trying to find the report itself was difficult. You had to do some searches to find it. So I think that there should be some more icons, whatever, to be able to find these reports a lot easier. Even going through our own search engine and stuff, I can find the reports going back to 2016 and 2020 and 2021, but not the most recent one. That's why I find it so difficult with our search engine process. It doesn't list them in chronological order. It's all over the map. So, but I think it's time that we perhaps it would have been nice to see that attached to this report we had was the actual copy of the agreement anyway, so we can read the agreement ourselves to refresh our memories of it and stuff. So I'd like to perhaps if we can find out what our last agreement we had with them, and perhaps circulate that to members of the committee, or perhaps have it circulated to members of the council when it comes to budget time. Because I think supplementary education is like $13,572,000 is the allocation that's currently on the budget for it. And the question is, are we getting good value for that or not? Or do we go back to the charter where we're allowed to have up to a 10% reduction if we want to look at reducing that thing? But I was looking at the report, they're online, their 24-25 report, and looking at the distribution and stuff, and they got social workers on the FTEs there, and they got library assistants, and they got various music teachers. So I was kind of scratching my head, like, why is the social workers being paid for out of supplementary education? I thought that'd be something more out of the mandatory education funding than would be supplementary. So I just found it a little difficult of how they're dispersing it. But I can say, though, that I have seen the tangible benefits of it. Just recently at a couple of Christmas concerts, the music choirs will read a disclaimer statement saying this, the support for this choir is coming from the supplementary education part of the issue. So a bit of an advertisement and endorsement being read before the concert, so people know how these kids are getting educated through their fine arts program. So I guess they're trying to show value for money by advertising during their performances. So it's good to see that they're at least recognizing that. But to see it established as a Halifax Regional Arts Program, and it seems like it's kind of separating itself from the Halifax Regional School Center of Education. So it's kind of a different relationship there. So I don't know, do we have the school board in here to make the presentation of the budget, or the Halifax Regional Arts group to come make the presentation of budget time? So those are things I'd like to get clarified. How you think we should move forward on this?
So thank you, Jerry Blackwood, CFO. So just a few things you mentioned. First of all, it'd be helpful for this report if the agreement was attached. So it's not a staff report; it was the Auditor General report. We did a report to Council last year, which provided a 1-year renewal on this agreement. I think Councillor Cleary summed it up very well. In terms of the last negotiation, Council was comfortable with how the agreement was structured, and I know there's some granularities with that. Mr. Atherton pointed out some stuff around, expenses for music teachers. You mentioned about budget, so this comes around every year, budget. There's always opportunity to ask. It's part of the fiscal business unit. We don't normally attach agreements. If we had attached an agreement to and contract every single budget line, I think we would be doing budget for 2 years rather than 6 months. But this will be coming back to council probably either in January or February, because the contract does expire at the end of March. So, it will be up to council again as to how granular you want to get with this program. I think one of the things that's important to, in terms of, we can look at it and say, okay, the funding is being spent on programs, right? But if you want to get into what are the impacts of that program, I think, education is kind of outside of our mandate, and we may have to, contract that out to a third party, an expert who can assess educational programs if there's certain specific, deliverables or outcomes that you want to see from that. But that can all come back in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Councillor St. Amant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the things that's important as we look at agreements like this is not to be too directive with the approach, but maintaining visibility into how the funds are being spent. There's a natural ebb and flow within arts programs that is not only determined by the availability of funding, but also the student population that they're serving in any given year, as you might imagine, changes from year to year. And so, we wind up with teachers having to move between schools on the basis of the school population in one center versus another, how large the music or arts program happens to be in one school versus another. And you have, pretty regular changes that are determined by need, demand, and also the resource availability. If a particular music teacher moves on, how does that school wind up bringing on someone else in order to occupy that position? And does that then affect the programs that they are able to offer? So the equity piece of it, I agree, that's definitely a consideration, but some of it is also going to be determined by the students in need of service in that given school year. And so there may not be a whole lot of control that we're able to exercise over the equity side of things. When the needs are balanced between the school population and the resources that are available to deliver these programs. I came out of the music program myself, going through junior high and high school, playing in band. And, we constantly compared ourselves to other schools, what they had, what teacher was available, what their specialty was. So some music programs had an inordinate number of options, and other programs at other schools had one and only one option, and it was partly due to student demand, but it was also based on what the teacher felt that they were capable of taking on themselves. And so I think that's why this level of flexibility in spending becomes a valuable part of how HRCE utilizes the funding, because there is such flexibility in the way that they spend. As long as we have visibility into it, I'm comfortable with how they choose to spend it, because they are going to make the appropriate decisions on a year-over-year basis and even a term-over-term basis based on what the needs are in that moment.
Thank you, Councillor St. Amand. I see no other names on the list, so thank you very much, our Auditor General, Andrew Atherton, to Ashley and to Leah. Thank you for being with us today. Just for the new members, there was no other motion associated with that report. So we'll now move on to item 13.2.1, which is the second quarter 24-25 financial report. Excuse me, there is a presentation associated with the report, and Dave Harley, Director of Financial Management and Operations, and Tiffany Smith, Manager of Service Delivery, will be presenting and available to answer any questions. So we'll have our presentation first, and then we'll put the motion on the floor for discussion and debate. Over to you.
All right. Good morning. My name is Tiffany Smith, Manager Service Delivery with Finance, and I'm going to walk you through the presentation this morning that provides a overview of HRM's financial position for the period ending September 30th. So just quickly, last quarter, our projected position was a deficit of $482,000, so that would have been at the end of June, and that's a total change of $163,000 from where we're projected now. So current projection coming into the end of September is a deficit of $319,000, and I'm just going to walk you through the biggest items that contribute to that position. So we had an unscheduled debt repayment of $4.3 million. There was an option of either refinancing at a higher interest rate or repaying the debt, and we went with repaying the debt to save some interest expense. An increase in compensation and benefits across the organization is a $2 million increase, and that includes casual benefits, casual wages, as well as overtime in addition to regular salaries and benefits. Unbudgeted fencing, rental, site remediation, and other costs associated with encampment sites was approximately $1 million, and an increase in building operation and maintenance, primarily due to aging infrastructure, is just under $800,000. Partially offsetting those amounts is an increase in detransfer tax, $2 million. This is mostly increase in the real estate market, presumably due to lower interest rates. We've released various contingencies, about $2 million. Recoveries from insurance claims net of an increase in legal fees is $1.9 million. And then an increase in interest and investment revenues is another $1.1 million. That's due to our budget assuming rate cuts starting at the beginning of the year. And then an increase in permit revenues is another $1.1 million, and that's primarily building permits as well as street openings. All right. So the next slide is on risks. Basically, these are items that we monitor throughout the year, so they're not in our projections at this point, but could have an impact on our projected position. So severe weather-related events, we're just coming into our winter storm season. Commodity cost fluctuations, this could end up being an opportunity or a risk, so that's fuel, diesel, salt costs. And then staffing and contractor shortages, so we have made gains in staffing up, however there are still some positions that are difficult to recruit for across the municipality, and there are limits in the market, particularly around contractor skilled trades sectors, and this is more an impact on service delivery as well as project delivery. Next slide is on counselor fund accounts. So there's two counselor fund accounts that we provide updates on. There's the district capital funds and district activity funds. So the total district capital fund budget is 3.1 million. To the end of September, 2.4 million has been spent or committed, and that leaves 644,000 available to the end of the fiscal year. District activity funds, that's a total budget of 72,000, and 65,000 has been spent or committed to the end of September, and that leaves 7,000 available, and the full details are in attachment 3 and 4 of your report. Next slide's on recreation area rates. There's 22 of these area rate accounts that we report on. Surplus at the beginning of the fiscal year was 1.2 million. Revenues earned to September 30th are 1.1 million, and that's against expenses of 964,000. So that leaves a surplus of 1.2 million at September 30th. Next report is on a summary of our reserves. So our opening balance is 44 million. Projected closing balance at the end of the year, that's considering any commitments and contributions that we're aware of, is 305 million. And then we project forward into the future to fiscal 27-28, so that projected uncommitted closing balance at that point in time is 46.7 million. Next slide is on our aged accounts receivable. Our gross accounts receivable at September 30th is 463 million. And just to note that of that 463 million, 432 million of that is actually current. So that leaves 30 million that's actually overdue. That's primarily due to the timing of this report. The property tax bills would have been issued at this point, but are not actually due until the 31st of October. Next slide is our capital projection summary. So the net budget available before expenditures are 781 million at September 30th. Actual expenditures to September 30th are 163 million. Projected expenditures to the end of the year are 301 million, and then work projected to advance into next fiscal is 293 million, and the full details by project and asset class are available in attachment 8. So the next two slides are provincial requirements in terms of reporting. The first one is the hospitality expenditures, and there's a definition on the slide of what type of expenditures are included in that. For the 3-month period ending September 30th, there is just under 3,000 in hospitality expenditures across the municipality. Next slide is expenses for reportable individuals. So this details the mayor, councillor, and CAO expenditures. Again, for a 3-month period ending September 30th was just over 20,000. And you'll note this would be the previous council represented, as it's just reported to September 30th. Okay, so the final slide is actually a new report that we've started including in the quarterly report. And this is tracking council approvals throughout the year that are coming outside of the previously approved budget. To give an idea of new costs that are coming through, you'll see a lot of these in the coming budget presentations that'll be coming forward as increases, particularly on the operating side. The full details are in attachment 11. Just to summarize though, new estimated operating costs are just under 2 million. New estimated capital costs are just under 200,000, and then reduced reserve deposits for 446,000. And I will note that that would only include public council reports, so anything in camera would not be included in these amounts. So that's the end of the presentation for this morning. Happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so very much, Tiffany. I don't see any names on the list. If you would indulge me, I'd have a question. Oh, okay. Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just thank you, first of all, for the report. And it's about sort of where I expected us to be. One of the more striking things I found is you go through the financial results business unit by business unit, and I was looking at the report on, I'm trying to find it now. I was looking on my phone while I was coming here. The reasons, this would be pages, actually the pages aren't numbered, but it's the table where it has the explanations of the surpluses and the overages. The vast majority of surpluses for business units, and some of them are quite substantial, are from vacancies. And it sort of led me to think about a couple of different things. And so, you know, I guess you could go one of two ways, and sort of two ways within one of those. One is, wow, we're not hiring people, or we're not able to hire people. I'm not sure what the reason is. And the burden must be overwhelming for the staff who are working here. Are we looking at burnout? Are we looking at those kind of things? But then I was thinking, well, if we seem to be doing okay and things are running, the wheels haven't fallen off her, and not yet anyway, and so maybe we don't need as many FTEs as we say we have on paper, and so maybe we could cut some of those. Or you could go the other way and say, well, if we fill those, then that gives us actually more capacity than we have now. So if we don't want to grow and do things we need to do, I think we're golden. I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure, because you guys are not running all those business units, you know, the CIO's office and fire and police and all the rest of it. But it will be a question that comes up at budget time. Because, you know, it just includes, you know, amounts of 300 here, 500 here, 600 here. We're talking, you know, these start to add up. And so this is quite a few FTEs, although the number of FTEs aren't reported here. So anyway, that jumped out at me when you get sort of looking at that level. And so that's something that I'll be paying attention to. The other one that's going to come up at budget time, and I love this one, this was the crossing guards moving over to community safety, and the little note, you know, and the budget for that remained with HRP. And I was just like, huh. And then, of course, the way we fund HRP is it's an envelope. We don't tell them what to spend it on. We say, here's your money. So once we do that, we can't then claw that portion back. Mind you, I'll be asking for that exact amount at budget time, because I'll be looking to make sure that that's not added to whatever they ask for. So anyway, those two little things jumped out at me. So thank you for that. And those explanations, and I don't know how long it takes the business units to come up with those and who collates them, but I really appreciate the fact that they're there, because you start looking at those numbers, especially on the tables, looking at our revenues. And it's funny when you look at the revenues, like, why does the CAO's office have revenue? And then you're like, oh, you know, secondments and other things going on. It's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But anyway, I'm not looking for a comment necessarily, unless you know why the business units are saving so much money on vacancies. But anyway, that'll come up.
Did you want to answer to that, Dave? Respond. Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So Dave Harley, Director of Financial Management and Operations. So I'll just make a couple quick points on that. So one of the things we do actually do when we're doing up the budgets is we are actually factoring in some amount for vacancies throughout the year. So the positions are budgeted at full cost of position, but we offset that with what we call vacancy management. And you'll see that in the budget lines that we have for all these groups. So while there are definitely some surpluses that come with vacancies and positions, I think we also see there is a push organizationally to be able to fill some of those vacancies, especially as we're looking to grow as a municipality. And a lot of these, you could have positions that were newly created, especially at the start of the year. They get created as part of the budget process. It takes time to fill those positions, so that vacancy number actually tends to trend downward as we get further out through the year. Just quickly on your comment on the crossing guards. So the reason for that budget staying behind in HRP at that point in time was the timing of that move. If that move had happened while we were doing the budget, we would have transferred that budget. So what you'll see when you actually look at the community safety business unit and the HRP business units part of their budget this year is you will see transfers noted from going from HRP, transferring those funds over to community safety to fund up those positions. So in year we'll handle that through projections of projected surplus and deficit in each of the groups. Yes.
Councillor Saint-Amand.
Now I've got the green light. Thanks very much for providing that complete context for the numbers that we're seeing. One of the things that I notice is really, I guess it's twofold. Is we've got combinations of vacancies that provide a little bit of float within an individual department, but we may also simultaneously have overtime within either that same business unit or an adjacent business unit. And you know, looking at are we achieving our goals by having those vacancies present? If we were to recruit, then it might wind up resulting in less overtime, and so we would have a greater offset in the fact that we'd be paying, you know, a full-time employee position rather than, you know, time and a half or double time for any given position. So there may be some potential savings there just in the recruitment side alone. Even though we wouldn't achieve the savings that we would get from the vacancy, we wind up having a compensatory reduction in the amount of overtime that we see. In the CAO's staffing report, I did see a connection also between certain business units that had a significant amount of disability time or time away for health reasons, and the connection to overtime, particularly in our fire and police services, where there would naturally be a connection between those two figures. And that's not spoken to contextually in the CAO's report, but you might get a little bit of an inkling of those relationships even in the reporting here. I'm wondering if you can speak to whether we've fully explored the relationship between those potential elements that offset one another. Maybe not with a one-to-one relationship, but certainly they would have an influence over one another over time.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair to the Councillor. So we are aware that there are those, I would say, trade-offs there between overtime and your vacancy. We haven't done an in-depth look at kind of on a per business unit basis of, you know, the trade-offs that you might be seeing in certain groups. We know, we do understand that, you know, the differences are, might be different in fire versus police. You have different contractual agreements there, so there's different rules around what the overtime is, where that overtime is earned, how much that overtime is paid at. So some of them may be paid at time and a half, some might be straight time. There might be different factors that tie into that. Could also be how that overtime is earned, whether it's a question of, you know, are they doing their full 40 hours and then earning overtime, or is it overtime that's because of the work that they're doing?
Different
and that
classification
counts.
of work,
Exactly.
yeah.
So there's all different nuances that play in that. We haven't gone through and done an in-depth look at the different business units, because there's a lot of different factors in play with across the different business units, because different business units may also have multiple different union contractual agreements that are factoring into that as well. So it's something that I think is important to look at some point, but it's going to take a lot of time and effort to be able to pull that level of information together.
Just what I noticed is that you know, those three business units with obviously different considerations as far as the stress that the employee is managing. So really, it was you know, fire, police, and transit. Those were the three where there were, first of all, very noticeably larger numbers on both accounts, but they rose and fall together over time when you look at it historically as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor St. Amand. Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just since we're on the topic of vacancy management, perhaps a question for our CFO. How important is vacancy management in the upcoming budget, and what has been the direction to business units this year on vacancy management?
Thank you very much, Councillor Morse. Great question. There always seems to be, when business units come forward, that finance has put what's called a vacancy target to their budget. That is not accurate. What we do, and I think Mr. Harley spoke to it a little bit, is we budget vacancy management based on the trend. Okay, so each business unit may have a different overall. Like if you looked at HRM, for example, straight up total comp all business units, it might be, a 4 or 5%, for example. But it could be 10% in some other business units compared to 2 in other business units. So it's not a straight up, everybody gets, like, for example, a 4% vacancy target. It's based on the trend in terms of how your number of vacancies that are outstanding and the trend of compensation savings. So as Dave said, there's a lot of moving parts, especially within fire and police for various reasons, as an essential service. But that's one of the things we're certainly going to be looking at a little bit more as, we become a growing city and there's more requests for FTEs. We certainly want to make sure there's always that balance between what is good overtime and what is bad overtime, right? It's overtime isn't a bad thing, but it's just your level of comfort with it. But we will be we have budgeted in the targets that have been issued to the business units based on their vacancy trend.
And the trend would be year over year, or every 3, like looking at 3 years, or more?
Yeah, it would be like a year over year trend.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morse. I don't see any other questions, so if you'd indulge me a few comments and a question. So vacancy management was going to be one of my questions, but a good discussion here. One of the things I thought I would pay some attention to is we've got vacancies, we'll have new hire asks, and it's like that's operational. So when it hits the tax bill is an interesting thing. So sometimes we'll see, a position, and in year 1, it might have 6 months, but then year 2, you've got the full year. So it's just always watching, just because it's at this number in year 1, watch to see what year 2 is once it's full time. So that's something to always watch when we're looking at budgets. And a very small pet peeve is around recreational area rates. So we collect area rates from our residents. And I think when we use the word that there's a surplus versus unspent, because the money stays within the area rate in their associations, the next year they make their business case, right? They use it. So sometimes I think that when people look at that and they think, well, there's a surplus, that means they didn't need it or they didn't spend it. But it could be that they're building something for the next year, like they're building a pot for a project in their community or whatever. So I guess I always wonder why we use the word surplus rather than unspent, where it's an area rate and I see it different.
Thank you, Karen. That's a good question. I believe we use the word surplus mostly because when we speak in municipal finance terms, we talk about an annual surplus and deficit, regardless of whether or not that surplus or deficit is carried forward or not. So on an annual basis, yes, there was a surplus of funds in the account. That, as you mentioned, you're absolutely correct. Those monies carry forward, and they can use those in future years, and they are held strictly for the use of that group. So it would be funds that they could be saving up to utilize for a bigger project in a future year. So we can look at maybe adjusting some of the terminology we use on that report.
Well, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. So no other names on the list. Would a member of council like to put the motion on the floor? Councillor Gillis, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion is that Audit and Finance Committee for the second quarter 2024-25 financial report to Regional Council for their information. So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Hensby. Any question on the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you, Tiffany. The next item on our agenda is 13.2.2, a modem purchases for Public Works and Halifax Transit. There is no motion, no presentation, but David Thorpe, Executive Director for IT, and CIO, Darrell Hitz, Director of Architecture and Infrastructure, and Mark Sanatilli, Manager of Technical Services, Halifax Transit, are available to answer any questions that we might have. There is a motion present. Councillor Hensby, would you like to put the motion on the floor?
Don't got Canada at the moment. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Cleary.
I'll do it for David while he's out getting a drink of water. I'll move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council approve the following funding transfers. A, for the Public Works purchase, $56,000 from Capital Project CT 200004, Controller Cabinet and Detection, and $225,670 from Q526 Capital Fund Reserve to Capital Funding Capital Project CI 200003 IT Infrastructure Recap totaling $281,670 in transferred funds. B, for the Halifax Transit purchases, $150,000 from Capital Project CM210013 Fixed Route Planning, Scheduling and Operations, and $619,000 from Q526 Capital Fund Reserve to Capital Project CM210011 Transit Fare Management totaling $769,000 in transferred funds. Very briefly on this, it's funny when I first looked at it and it was like modem purchases. And then of course you read it, it's like, oh right, because our light signals have to talk to each other and to some control center. Right, okay, I get why we need these now. So anyway, I just had these moments of like 1995 dial-up AOL kind of thing when I heard modem. Yeah, do the cabinets make sounds like, anyway, that's a whole other thing. No, happy to forward this on and recommend it to Regional Council.
I see no further names. Call for the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Thank you so very much, everyone. 13.2.3 is the proposed 2025 meeting schedule. We have no presentation, but Dorothy is available to answer any questions for us. Councillor Hensby.
The proposed 2025 Audit and Finance Standing Committee's meeting and schedule as outlined in the staff memorandum.
The seconder, Councillor Morse. Thank you so very much. Any conversation on the motion, or would you like to call for the question? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. Thank you so very much. Next item, motions, there are none. In camera, none. Added items, there are none. Notices of motion. Any notices of motion? The date of the next meeting is January 15th, 2025. And Councillor Hensby has asked for a motion to adjourn at 11:28. We are adjourned. Thank you so very much, everyone.